The Vethar have a word for the way humans approach biology. It translates, roughly, as enthusiastic error. They don't mean it as a compliment. I found this out during my third week aboard Joint Recovery Station Ketharan, when Senior Medical Lead Veth Sal pulled me aside after a routine integration briefing and told me, with the particular brand of courtesy that contains a knife somewhere in the middle, that my presence on the surgical floor was observational in classification, non-participatory in function. I was there to watch, to learn, to appreciate, presumably, how a civilization that had been practicing medicine for 4,000 years did things correctly. I thanked him and said that sounded fine. My name is Sev Oral. I'm a xenobiologist attached to the Joint Species Medical Exchange Program out of the Keth Corridor Compact. My actual job, the one on the paperwork, is to observe Vethar clinical practice and document areas of potential cross-species application. The Vethar's understanding of my job is that I am a very expensive piece of furniture that occasionally asks questions. That was fine too. I'd been a piece of furniture before. The Vethar are crystalline in structure, not literally, but close enough that the analogy holds. Their body plans are angular, precise, their movements exact in the way that expensive instruments are exact. Their surgical technique matches the body. Every motion is economical. Every tool is purpose-built for a single function. Their operating theaters are immaculate in a way that makes human OR suites look like the back of a food truck. I will give them that freely. They are beautiful to watch. What they are less good at is improvising. I learned this at 0340 station time on a Tuesday when a Vethar transport docked with a critical patient, a civilian worker, male, mid-lifespan, internal hemorrhage from a pressure seal failure in the cargo transfer corridor. His name was Kethovar Ren. He was in poor shape by the time they got him on the table. I was in the observation tier. I was not supposed to be anywhere else. The Vethar team moved well. I will say that. They moved with the kind of precision that comes from drilling the same response pattern 1,000 times, and for the first 4 minutes, everything looked exactly like it was supposed to look. Veth Sal calling instruments. 2 surgical techs responding without having to be asked. The diagnostic field reading pressure and fluid in real time. Then the primary coagulation array failed. It didn't fail catastrophically, it just stopped. A power interruption somewhere in the station grid, routed through the surgical bay's secondary circuit, which apparently hadn't been rated for simultaneous diagnostic and interventional load. The array dropped offline. The backup array came online and ran a self-diagnostic, which took 47 seconds, during which Kethovar Ren continued to bleed. 47 seconds is a long time in a chest cavity. Veth Sal was calm, I will say that too. He called for manual intervention, which in Vethar practice means a secondary instrument set, also precise, also beautiful, also built on the assumption that the diagnostic array would be running concurrently. Without the field readings, the instruments were navigating by architecture alone. Vethar anatomy is well mapped. The team knew exactly where things were supposed to be. The problem was that a pressure seal failure injury doesn't leave things where they're supposed to be. I watched Vethar Sal work for 90 seconds. I watched the monitor. I watched the rate at which Kethovar Ren's pressure was dropping. Then I came down from the observation tier. There is a protocol for this. It involves notifying the medical lead, requesting temporary participatory reclassification, and waiting for confirmation. I did not do any of that. I put on gloves, picked up a retractor from the instrument tray, and introduced myself to the patient's thoracic cavity. Veth Sal said, "This is not your function." I said, "No, it isn't." He said, "You are observational classification, non-participatory." I said, "I know." He didn't physically stop me. I think he was too surprised, or possibly he was watching the monitor too, and doing the same math I was doing. What I did next is the part that gets described as barbaric in the incident report. I understand why. Human field surgery, the kind practiced in environments where the equipment is unreliable or absent, looks nothing like Vethar surgical technique. It is not precise. It is not economical. It does not use purpose-built instruments for single functions. It uses whatever is present, applied with judgment, developed from a working understanding of what the tissue is doing and why, and it looks, to any observer trained in formal surgical practice, like exactly what the incident report called it, an improvised biological intervention of non-standard class, offensive to established procedural framework. I packed the bleed manually, which required my hand to be somewhere that surgical hands are not supposed to go in Vathar practice. I used traction sutures placed by eye, without field readings, because I have been placing traction sutures by eye since my residency in stations where the diagnostic equipment was 14 years old and broke on Tuesdays. I used a technique for managing the secondary bleed point that a Vathar medical lead would never use, because it requires knowing that you can close a specific type of vascular damage by applying pressure at an angle that looks wrong and holding it for longer than feels right, a thing you know in your hands before you know it in your head. Vethsal filed the formal objection at the 4-minute mark. I know this because he told me, while I was working, that he was filing it. I said that sounded reasonable. The backup array came fully online at the 5-minute mark. By then, the primary bleed was managed. Kethovar-Ren's pressure had stabilized, not recovered, stabilized, and the diagnostic field showed what I had estimated from feel. 2 secondary sites, both accessible, both holding with the sutures in place. Vethsal looked at the field readings for a long time. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the field readings again. He took over from that point, formally, pertussurally, with the diagnostic array running, and every instrument doing exactly its design job. He closed correctly. He closed beautifully, actually. I stepped back and let him do it, because that part I genuinely could not have done as well. Kethovar-Ren was in recovery by 04:30. The post-incident review took 3 days. I was invited to attend one session, where a panel of 4 Vathar medical administrators asked me to describe, in precise detail, what I had done and why I had done it. I described it. They wrote things down. One of them, a very senior administrator whose name I didn't catch, asked whether what I had done was standard human surgical practice. I thought about it. I said it was standard for the conditions. He asked what conditions. I said, conditions where the equipment doesn't work. He wrote that down too. The formal conclusion of the post-incident review classified my intervention as an improvised biological technique of non-standard procedural class, applied in the absence of functional diagnostic infrastructure, outcome positive, causal contribution to patient survival, significant. The formal objection Vethsal filed at the 4-minute mark was attached as a supporting document. Nobody explained to me what it was supporting. I didn't ask. My observational classification was amended. The new designation read, participatory, field conditions, advisory capacity, concurrent diagnostic failure scenarios. Vethsal delivered the amended paperwork himself. He set it on the table in front of me without saying anything, which I had already learned was how the Vathar handled situations for which they did not have a prepared response. I thanked him. He said the technique was inelegant. I said I knew. He said there was no theoretical basis for the pressure angle I had used. I said that was probably true. He said the patient was alive. I said yes. He picked up his things and left. I sat with the paperwork for a while. Outside the porthole, the station's running lights made a slow circuit of the docking ring. A Vathar cargo hauler was finishing its approach on the port side, moving with that same economical precision, everything in its right place, functioning exactly as designed. I thought about the 47 seconds. I thought about how they build their systems for the assumption that the systems work, and how that assumption is almost always correct, and how almost always is not the same as always, and how the distance between those two things is where my entire medical education lives. I filed my own incident report that evening. It was shorter than Vethsal's. It said, patient presented in critical condition, primary array offline, field intervention performed, patient stabilized, handed off to lead surgeon for formal closure, outcome positive. I added one note at the bottom. It said, equipment limitations noted. Recommend cross-species field technique exchange program for scenarios involving concurrent infrastructure failure. I sent it to the medical exchange office. They responded 3 weeks later with a meeting request. I kept the paperwork.